The Chosen Season 6 has finally shown us what may be the darkest and most emotional chapter of the entire series. And this short teaser is already giving fans a lot to talk about. Jesus is beaten, bloodied, and wearing the crown of thorns. Mary watches her son suffer. Judas moves closer to his tragic ending. Pilate is trapped under pressure. And Simon of Cyrene is suddenly pulled into the story when Jesus becomes too weak to carry the cross alone. But there is something even more interesting hidden inside these few moments. The teaser may be short, but almost every shot is connected to a major event that could make Season 6 completely different from anything we have seen before. So, what exactly is hidden in this first look, and what can these moments tell us about what is coming? Let's break down the Chosen Season 6 teaser and look at the biggest details, emotional moments, and possible surprises that fans may have missed. The first thing that immediately stands out in the Chosen Season 6 teaser is Mother Mary and Jesus. Right from the opening moments, the tone feels completely different from the earlier seasons. We have spent years watching Jesus travel from place to place, healing people, teaching his followers, performing miracles, and building relationships with the disciples. But now the story has reached the point where everything is beginning to fall apart. This is the season leading directly toward the crucifixion, and the teaser makes it very clear that we are about to enter one of the darkest parts of the entire story. We see Jesus after the violence has already begun. His face is covered in blood, one eye looks swollen, and the crown of thorns is sitting heavily on his head. Even though the teaser only gives us a short look, the damage is obvious. Jesus is not walking toward the crucifixion as the strong teacher we have followed throughout the previous seasons. He has already been beaten, humiliated, and pushed to the edge of his physical strength. And then we see Mary. That is what makes this moment so painful. Mary is not simply watching a stranger suffer. She is watching her own son being treated this way. She knows who Jesus is. She knows the miracles she has seen and the life he has lived. Yet there is almost nothing she can do to stop what is happening, and that emotional helplessness could become one of the biggest parts of Season 6. One of the most important details in this opening moment is the wooden beam Jesus is carrying. This is the horizontal piece of the cross, commonly known as the patibulum. Jesus is struggling under its weight as he moves toward the place where he will be crucified. But what makes this even more difficult is that he is already badly injured before he even begins this journey. He is not simply carrying a heavy piece of wood, he is carrying it while his body is already exhausted and wounded. The teaser makes that very clear. And then there is the crown of thorns. The design here looks larger and more painful than the simple version we often see in other portrayals of the crucifixion. It sits heavily around Jesus' head, and the blood running down his face makes the image even more disturbing. This is not meant to make the audience comfortable. It is meant to show the reality of what Jesus is going through. Behind him, we can also see Roman soldiers and other men being taken toward crucifixion. That small detail is easy to miss, but it matters because Jesus is not the only person being led toward death. The Roman authorities are carrying out an entire execution process, and Jesus is being treated as one more prisoner. But we know he is not just another prisoner, and the audience knows exactly where this is going. That is what makes the teaser so suspenseful. There is no mystery about whether Jesus will be crucified. We already know the story. Instead, the suspense comes from watching every character slowly move toward a moment that we know cannot be avoided. The teaser also gives us a look at the Roman soldiers preparing the crown of thorns. We see them handling the thorny branches and getting everything ready. In the background, there are also wooden beams prepared for the people who will be crucified. These details may seem small, but together they create a very dark atmosphere. The execution is being prepared before our eyes, and Jesus is moving closer to it. Then the teaser takes us back to the arrest of Jesus, and this is where Judas becomes one of the most important characters to watch. We see Judas with the group that comes to take Jesus away. There are religious leaders and other men with him, and they are moving toward Jesus after everything has already been set in motion. But the most painful part is seeing Jesus look back toward Judas. Think about everything these two characters have been through. Judas was not some random man who appeared at the end of Jesus' journey. He was one of the disciples. He walked with Jesus. He listened to him teach. He saw things that most people could only dream of seeing. He was part of the group that followed Jesus through the earlier seasons. And now he is leading the people who have come to arrest him. That makes this moment much more emotional than a simple betrayal. Jesus knows what Judas has done. Judas knows what he has done. And both of them understand that there is no easy way to take it back. The teaser seems to be setting up Judas's final and most tragic chapter. His story has already been moving in this direction, but season 6 could finally show the full emotional weight of his decision. And what makes it even more interesting is that Judas will have to deal with the consequences while the disciples are also falling apart around him. Peter is another character who becomes extremely important during this part of the story. We know Peter is going to face his own terrible failure, and the teaser gives us hints of how emotionally difficult this entire period will be for the disciples. There is also the possibility of an important interaction between Judas and Peter, which could be one of the most painful conversations of the season. Both men are going to experience guilt, but their responses to that guilt could not be more different. And then we move into the trial. This is another major moment shown in the teaser. Jesus stands before Pilate while the crowd demands a decision. Pilate appears trapped in a situation that he does not completely understand or control. He has political pressure coming from one side, religious leaders pushing the situation from another, and an angry crowd demanding that something be done. And that is what makes Pilate interesting here. He does not appear to believe Jesus deserves this punishment. He seems to understand that there is something unusual about the situation, but he is also trying to keep order. He is trying to avoid a larger problem. The crowd is angry, the religious leaders are demanding action, and Pilate has to make a decision. The teaser also shows familiar characters from previous seasons among the people watching everything happen. That is something The Chosen does very well. Even when the story reaches its biggest moments, the show continues to connect those moments to characters and relationships that were introduced years earlier. We see Mary, Mary Magdalene, John, and others surrounded by an angry crowd. And that contrast is heartbreaking. On one side, there are people demanding Jesus' death. On the other side, there are people who love him and understand that something terrible is happening. Then we get the shot of Barabbas, and this may be one of the most important images in the entire teaser. Jesus and Barabbas are placed together before the crowd, and we already know what the crowd is going to choose. They will release Barabbas and condemn Jesus. But there is something deeper about this moment. Barabbas walks away because Jesus takes his place. The guilty man goes free, the innocent man is punished. And that makes Barabbas' story much more interesting than simply being the criminal who gets released. The show has already given him a complicated background, and his connection to the Zealots adds another layer to the situation. Now he is standing beside Jesus at exactly the moment when his life is spared. What happens to him after that? Does he ever understand what really happened? Does he ever think about the man who took his place? Those are questions the story could explore, even if only through small moments. And then the teaser becomes even harder to watch. We see Jesus tied to the pillar for the scourging. This is where the physical suffering becomes impossible to ignore. Jesus is already exhausted, but the beating is only beginning. His hands are against the pillar, his body is damaged, and the violence that follows is going to leave him even weaker. The teaser does not need to show every detail. We already understand what is happening. And that is enough. Because the emotional power of this season is not simply about showing suffering. It is about showing the people who have to watch it happen. Peter sees it, Matthew sees it, Mary sees it, John sees it. The people who followed Jesus for years are now watching him being treated like a criminal, and Matthew especially looks devastated. We see Peter comforting him, and that small moment tells us a lot about the state of the disciples. They are trying to hold each other together, but they have no idea how to stop what is happening. This is where The Chosen Season 6 could become more than just a story about the crucifixion. It could become a story about what happens to everyone around Jesus when their entire understanding of the world is suddenly being tested. And then we get another major moment. Jesus is walking through the streets, but he is struggling to continue. This is where Simon of Cyrene enters the moment. Simon is forced to help Jesus carry the wooden beam. And his appearance is especially interesting because he has already been connected to the story earlier. This means his involvement is not completely random. The show has already established a connection that can make this moment feel much more meaningful. Imagine what Simon must be thinking. One moment, he is simply going about his life. The next, he is being pulled into the middle of an execution. He is forced to carry the cross for a man surrounded by Roman soldiers and an angry crowd. And Jesus is barely able to keep moving. At first, Jesus is carrying the beam himself, but after everything that has happened to him, there comes a point where he simply cannot continue. Simon has to carry it for him. The Roman soldiers continue pushing them forward. The crowd continues watching, and Jesus continues moving toward the place where he will die. That is the real power of this teaser. It is not simply showing us that the crucifixion is coming. We already knew that. It is showing us the emotional road leading toward it. Judas is approaching his final collapse. Pilate is losing control. Barabbas is walking away from the punishment meant for him. Peter and Matthew are struggling to understand what they are seeing. Mary is watching her son suffer. Simon is carrying the cross. And Jesus is getting closer and closer to the moment that will change everything. The real question is not whether the crucifixion will happen. We know it will. The question is how the chosen will make us feel when it finally happens. And if this teaser is any indication, Season 6 may be far more emotional, painful, and intense than fans are prepared for. The closer Jesus gets to the cross, the more the teaser shifts from a story about what is happening to Jesus into a story about what his suffering is doing to everyone around him. And this is where The Chosen Season 6 could become much more than a simple retelling of the crucifixion. Every character is being pushed toward a moment they cannot escape, and some of them may never be the same again. One of the most painful images is Jesus falling while Simon of Cyrene carries the wooden beam. By this point, Jesus has already been beaten and weakened so badly that he can barely continue. The Roman soldiers are still pushing him forward, and the crowd is still around him, but his body is clearly reaching its limit. And Simon is now carrying the weight. That moment is important because Simon did not choose this responsibility. He was forced into it. Yet he becomes part of one of the most important moments in Jesus' final journey. He may have entered the story simply as a man caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, but he leaves this moment connected forever to what happened to Jesus. And then we see the people watching. Mary, John, Mary Magdalene, the women, the disciples. They cannot stop the soldiers, they cannot stop the crowd, they cannot take Jesus away from the cross. All they can do is watch. And sometimes that can be more painful than anything else. For Mary especially, this is not simply the death of an important religious figure. This is her son. She has known Jesus from the very beginning. She knows the story behind him in a way that almost nobody else can understand. And now she is watching him struggle to walk. That makes every shot of Mary in this teaser feel heavier. There is also another important character in these moments, John. John is one of the disciples who remains close to Jesus during the final hours, and his presence beside Mary could become one of the most emotional relationships in the season. The story is moving toward the moment when Jesus will look at Mary and John and create a new connection between them. That means John's role during the crucifixion is not simply about watching his teacher die. He is also about to become part of Mary's future, and that could make the scenes between them incredibly powerful. But while the people closest to Jesus are dealing with grief, Judas is dealing with something completely different. He is dealing with guilt. The teaser shows Judas in the temple, and everything about his expression suggests that he has finally understood the seriousness of his betrayal. He appears to be trying to return the money, but the damage has already been done. This is one of the most tragic parts of Judas's story. He wanted something to happen, he made a decision, he believed he knew where that decision would lead, and then he discovered that the consequences were much worse than he imagined. Now he is watching Jesus suffer, and he knows he helped put him there. That is why Judas's final moments could become some of the darkest scenes in Season 6. The teaser also gives us the image of Judas walking toward a tree with a noose waiting for him. There is no need to make the moment more complicated than it already is. Judas is approaching the end, and the crow nearby makes the entire image feel like a warning. Throughout stories and traditions, Crows can be connected to death, darkness, and things coming to an end, whether every detail has a deeper meaning or not. The image fits Judas perfectly at this point. He has lost hope. He believes there is no way back, and that is heartbreaking because the story of Jesus is supposed to be about forgiveness and redemption. Judas is standing right next to that message, and yet cannot see a way back for himself. That contrast could be extremely important. Because Peter is about to fail too. Peter will deny Jesus. Peter will feel shame. Peter will believe that he has failed the person he loves. But Peter's story will continue. Judas's story will take another direction. And Season 6 may use these two characters to show two very different responses to guilt. One gives up, the other eventually finds a way forward. That is why Judas's scenes should not simply be viewed as another subplot. They could be one of the emotional foundations of the entire season. Then there is Pilate. The teaser shows him struggling with the decision that is being forced upon him. He appears overwhelmed by everything happening around him, and his reaction suggests that he understands this situation is different from an ordinary trial. There is also the influence of his wife, who warns him to stay away from this situation. That adds another layer to Pilate's conflict. He has already been told that something is wrong. He has already seen the pressure building. And now he has to decide whether to protect an innocent man or protect his position. Pilate is not necessarily driven by hatred toward Jesus. He is driven by fear. Fear of the crowd, fear of unrest, fear of political consequences, fear of losing control. And that makes his decision even more interesting because it shows how easily someone can know that something is wrong and still choose the easier path. The teaser gives us that famous moment where Pilate washes his hands. It is almost like he is trying to separate himself from the decision. But he cannot. Once Jesus is handed over, Pilate may wash his hands, but the choice is still connected to him. And that is one of the central themes running through this part of the story. Everyone has a choice. Judas made his choice. Pilate will make his choice. Peter will make his choice. The religious leaders made theirs. The crowd will make theirs. And Jesus is making his own choice too. He chooses to continue. He chooses not to escape. He chooses to walk toward the cross. That is what makes the story so powerful. Jesus is not simply trapped by circumstances. He knows what is happening. He understands where it is going. And he continues anyway. The teaser also gives us another glimpse of Barabbas, and his story becomes even more meaningful when we remember what is happening at the same time. Barabbas is free. Jesus is being taken away. One man walks away from death, while another walks toward it. And Barabbas may not even fully understand the significance of what has just happened. The show has already made Barabbas more complicated than a simple villain. His past with the Zealots gives him a connection to the political tension of the time, and his previous encounters with Jesus make his release even more interesting. Maybe Barabbas begins to wonder why Jesus did not fight. Maybe he wonders why the crowd chose him. Maybe he begins to think about the man who took his place. If The Chosen decides to explore even a small part of that emotional journey, Barabbas could become one of the most fascinating supporting characters during this period. Then we return to the crucifixion. And this is where everything comes together. We see the crosses, we see the Roman soldiers, we see the people gathered around, and we see Jesus. By this point, there is no turning back. The wooden cross is waiting, the Roman authorities are in control, the crowd has made its decision, the disciples are helpless, and Jesus is about to be nailed to the cross. The teaser does not need to show every detail to make the audience understand what is coming. The emotion comes from the reactions. Mary is there, John is there, Mary Magdalene is there, Nicodemus is there, and other familiar characters are watching. These people have spent years with Jesus. They have eaten with him, they have laughed with him, they have seen miracles with him, they have listened to him speak. And now they are watching him die. That is why the crucifixion could be so emotionally powerful in The Chosen. It is not just the death of a historical figure. For these characters, it is the loss of someone they personally love. And then we get another powerful detail. Nicodemus is there without the head covering we normally associate with him, and his face appears completely devastated.